questioning is perhaps the greatest gift we have as human beings.
Science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking.
It's a way of thinking that teaches us to question everything we think we know.
Science came about by developing techniques, methodologies for gaining reliable knowledge about the world.
We have at our fingertips the technologies that were only possible for the largest governments and corporations 20 years ago as an individual today.
If the human civilization continued at anything remotely like the current pace of technology advancement for a million years, where would we be? I think we're either extinct or on a lot of planets.
The good thing about science is that it's true whether or not you believe in it.
We hold the scientific method in high regard because it works. If it stopped working, we'd throw it out.
Discover the past.
Create the future.
This is the Here and How podcast.
Welcome to the Here and How podcast, where every week we dive deep into big ideas, discovering the past so that we can create a brighter future together. I'm joined today by two magnificent co-hosts, Stephen Woodford and Rachel Oates. Say hi, guys.
Hi all.
Hi.
Today's episode is going to be on psychic phenomena and the paranormal. Have either of you two ever been to a psychic? And I'm going to psychically predict that one of you will say yes, at least.
I have, yeah.
I have.
Yes! I used my psychic powers.
You did.
Correctly.
You did. I should have said before answering, I psychically predict that you'll be happy when you realise that my answer is yes.
I've always wanted to go, but like just to kind of see what it's like. Not necessarily like to catch them out, but just to experience it. But at the same time, I kind of don't want to give them money, so...
Yeah, I understand.
So, Stephen, tell us about your experience with a psychic.
Sure, it was a family member. She was renowned in the family for being able to speak with the dead. That's what the assertion was. And I figured out that religion is nonsense by the age of 8. Not conclusively, but I figured out that the central premise is wrong. It's logically fallacious, etc. Though I wouldn't have used those terms, of course. Well, I was skeptical of what she was saying, what she was doing, and the family was actually getting quite irate with the fact that I am skeptical. So they arranged a meeting in which I would sit down with her. And before the meeting, I did research into psychics, and I came across cold reading, hot reading, Barnum statements, etc. And I basically watched out for it when she did it, and she was crap at it. I could tell what she was doing, and plus she knows me, so it's hot reading. So she was just saying things that she knows, and I was saying, "Well, are you talking to a dead family member?" And she said yes. And at that point, I asked her, "Well, can you tell me what it's like to be dead?" And no answer she could give was of any merit. And that was always something I found peculiar about psychics. It's always, yeah, he's all good, he's playing with a ball, or he's doing it. It's never, this happened, and this is what happens when you die. And I mean, some make claims like that. And the problem is when they make certain claims, you can test some claims. But essentially, I called bullshit on it quite quickly. And I'm better at this now, but it still comes every so often. Pseudoscientific bullshit, when it's perpetuated by people that know what they're doing, infuriates me. And so I called her a scummy person. I said that what you're doing is disgraceful. The fact that you're taking money is absolutely reprehensible. I don't want to see you again. And it caused a bit of a family uproar. But I maintain that these people are charlatans. They're nasty, nasty people. And that's not always the case. Some of them, they've bought into their own crap, and they really do think that they can speak with the dead and channel aliens, etc. But that's my stance. That's probably a good opening way for me to come in. I think it's really wrong.
Yeah, I do feel like there's the argument that, they're providing comfort for the loved ones of the dead. I'm like, no, you're taking advantage of emotionally vulnerable people. That's all there is to it, I think.
Yeah, we're going to dive into a little bit later on, what's the harm. But first, I kind of want to go into some of the techniques that they use and how they do it so that our listeners know what to look for and how they can spot it easily. I've done a whole series on this on Holy Kool-Aid, talking about the psychic tricks that are used and how they've been exposed.
Me too.
But the first thing and Rachel has too. We'll put links in the show notes for anyone who wants to go and check them out.
And you should check out Thomas's for definitely. I haven't seen yours, Rachel, but your ones are criminally underviewed, and they should see more.
Thank you. The first aspect I want to dive into is hot reading. And Rachel, how would you define hot reading? Because I know you've done a video on it.
Yeah. So I'd say they're the techniques that people use to try and, claim that they're psychic when they've already done research beforehand. So maybe they already know you, maybe they already know some facts about you, maybe they've Googled you. So the psychic twins are notorious for doing this. They do a lot of readings with like YouTubers, and they literally like pick out statements that YouTubers have mentioned in their videos. So I think in one of them they were doing a reading for Tana Mojo, and they literally were like, "Oh yeah, we're talking to your friend who committed suicide," and she'd done one of those like story time videos about her experience and her friend, and they literally picked up on like so many of the things that she mentioned in her videos. So it's using facts that are already kind of out there or already known and claiming that you're getting them from the spirits or whatever.
Yeah, so basically the difference between a hot reading and a cold reading is that a hot reading, you're going into it, like you said, with some research done ahead of time. So like a cold reading is like you show up, you don't know the person, it could be a random person selected from the audience, whereas a hot reading is you've had time to gather information on this person. And so a couple of examples of this would be like, if you have a show, and there's various famous psychics, and I'm not going to name specific names for legal reasons, but who have been caught ahead of time gathering. So they'll gather like the emails or the names of people that are going to be at their shows. And a lot of times you can find out a massive amount about someone just through a public Facebook profile or through a people search website, or there's different types of software that you can look up information on people. Or various shows will have, I think that John Edwards had or it was either John Edwards or Teresa Caputo. I'm fairly certain Teresa Caputo will gather information cards beforehand.
I think it's Sally Morgan does that as well. She gets them to fill out prayer cards.
Yeah. And so
of who's passed and stuff like that.
When you can see how easy it would be if you have these cards of people's information and it's like, who are you trying to reach and when did you lose them? And, give me information about this person. Penn and Teller did a episode of Bullshit where they had Rosemary Altea, who's a pretty big psychic here in the US. And she came in, and before the show started, she's walking through the audience talking to people before she didn't, they hadn't, I guess, called action. So I'm not sure if she realized that they were filming them or not, but she walks through the audience and she starts talking to people and she's like, who are you here to meet with? And this guy's like, my mom. And, she's like getting all this information from people. And then as soon as they're rolling, she walks right up to that same person. And she's like, I feel like you're here to talk with your mother. And it's like, wow, that's amazing. Like that, just incredible information that you've gathered there.
There was the Darren Brown documentary where he kind of followed a psychic around for like a week or so, and he went to like a reading with him, and it was like strangely accurate. And then afterwards, it turns out that the psychic, his sister, lived next door to the woman he was doing a reading for, and it's like they couldn't know for sure that like the sister had given him information, but it was a little bit suspect.
Yeah, and then when they took the same the same psychic in that documentary or that episode to a random house, then he fared much worse. And so it's like when you strip away those tools, there's a lot you can find out from the internet about someone. If you have their address, you can find it in Google Maps and Google Street View and see what the color of their door is. You can, search any kind of newspaper articles for them. You can search through obituaries online. Like there's a lot. You can find out their family history. There's like ancestry.com. You can find their family tree and any articles about anyone in their family that they loved.
Also, people buy tickets these days to even events that are, psychics or channelings, etc. They buy them online. And so if they're able to mingle with the organizers, they have access to the email address. You type that email address in, you're going to have a high chance of finding out just a bit of research. Their Facebook profile. You get on their Facebook profile, you know everything. A lot of people, I mean, it's just that's hot reading.
Yeah. And there was an episode of Howard Stern where he talked about how one of his co-hosts, or one of the guys on his show, was wanting to get Teresa Caputo on their show. And one of her stipulations was that in order to go on the show, she wanted to have ahead of time, I think it was an hour or two alone with the audience with no cameras. And it's like, well, that's a little bit shady. It's like she claims to be psychic, but she wants to have one-on-one time with the people to, just ask them about all their dead relatives, gather information, or,
You can also
why
acquire
do you need that if you're
information
psychic?
obliquely as well. If you understand demographics, etc., you can get information obliquely. I did a recent video on astrology, and so if someone was to try and guess your star sign, for example, and they asked you, do you have any allergies, and you revealed that you're lactose intolerant, they know from that information that there's a higher chance, quite a significantly higher chance, that you're born on one of 3 months in the year. So they can acquire things obliquely without actually asking direct questions.
That falls a little bit more into cold reading.
It does for sure. Yeah, that's fair point. Yeah, good point.
There's a lot of psychics up in Yorkshire where I'm from, and my sister-in-law is actually really, really into going to see psychics, but so are her sisters. So I've always said, like, do they not realise when they go in and have readings with them that, one sister mentions something, and then that psychic goes and says it to the other, as though, like, the spirits come through. And it's like they're all feeding her information about the same family that she can then go and just relay to the others. I'm like,
Yeah, well, and so there was also sometimes they'll use things like earpieces.
Peter Popoff, right?
Peter Popoff got exposed. He was a faith healer. He didn't claim to be psychic, but he claimed that God was giving him messages about people.
James Randi who exposed him?
Him. But there were allegations that Rosemary Altea was wearing an earpiece. There were several allegations about that. There's a clip of her coming off stage where she takes out one thing from one ear, which she claims is just a headset, but then she takes this other earpiece out of the other one and it's dangling. It's like, well, what's the other one for? That's a little bit suspicious.
There's an almost identical accusation with Sally Morgan as well.
Sorry, I meant Sally Morgan.
Oh, really? Oh, okay, yeah. It's
my mistake.
No, it's okay. But yeah, it's the amount of allegations against her are quite compelling.
Yeah. Is she the one that told somebody that their relative had died when they found out a couple of years later that the relative hadn't died? It just went missing, kind of thing.
That was actually Sylvia Brown.
Sylvia Brown, right?
Yeah.
Sylvia Brown, that happened to on more than one occasion. So she used to come on a show, the Montel Williams show, and she would do all these psychic readings, and people would come to ask her sometimes about someone who went missing. And there were at least 2, I think 3 cases, although I could be mistaken, where she literally said, this person died. And then there were 2 cases where she said this person died, and like one of them was found. And then another one, like they were found shortly afterwards.
She was the woman
that they had like been abducted. And then there was another case where someone said, like, where is we couldn't find the body. And she's like, they're near water. It's like, no, they died in 9/11 in the towers.
She was like, he was a firefighter, and she was like, what can I say? He's in water. It's like, no.
But that's a hit if you want it to be a hit, because it's the opposite.
We'll try to make it work.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of conflation happening here. I've just realized, like, with mixing the names, and in my case, mixing a faith healer with a psychic. And the reason for that is because it's all in the same bin, as far as I'm concerned.
They use a lot of the same techniques.
It's the same techniques to perpetuate different nonsense. It's just, I've really looked into the evidence for this, and there's nothing objective. It's all hearsay and subjective from people who want it to be true. So that's why conflation's happening on my part, just to put that out there.
I've actually got a book that I've been going through to kind of like review on my channel called Discover Your Psychic Powers. And if you want to laugh, this is amazing. It's by Tara Ward. It's so bad. It's brilliant. Just going to throw that out there.
Oh my gosh.
It's all about like cleansing and intuition and tuning into the spirits. It's quite funny.
Yeah.
Something I find quite funny with the psychic stuff, I just wanted to add, is while depending on your view, obviously our view, we we view religion as pseudoscience, and that tends to be something that's heavily endorsed by the right. Psychics, I've seen a lot of people on the left buy into that. I just thought I'd throw that out there because it's an interesting observation that I've at least had.
Mm. Well, I think because a lot of times if people on the right are super religious, there's an aversion to it because they think it's demonic.
Yeah.
And they think it's satanic. And, they're like, oh, you say that it's harmless, but it's actually, you're talking to demons.
Yeah.
And so people on the right, at least like when I was religious, that was kind of my aversion to psychics. If you're not religious, but you still believe in some type of spiritual connection with the universe, then yeah, they do oftentimes buy into
a lot
things
of
like that.
atheists I know who still buy into the whole psychic thing are like, they don't like the idea of organized religion. They don't like books like the Bible or the Quran or anything like that. They don't understand how there could be a God. But they always turn around to me and say like, but there's got to be something more, right? This can't be all there is. And I'm like,
yeah, I was going to say,
it's interesting.
It's infuriating. So in the US, you have real high religiosity, and in the UK, for example, it's much lower. But if you just look at that, it sounds like, oh, the English are figuring this out. But we are buying hook, line, sinker into so much nonsense. It's not religious nonsense. So one example is what Rachel just said. There's so many people that go, I'm not religious. And then you talk to them, you go, well, what do you think? What's your opinions on this and that? And it turns out that they're a spiritualist, and they've got some wishy-washy, loose weave paganism that they're adhering to, or they believe that there's got to be something more. It's actually quite rare to find someone that goes, yeah, I don't think there is anything. I recognize that the evidence is just not there, and so I have to operate on the assumption that we're just mammals and we got to get used to it. It's not nice, but get over it.
Yeah. Well, and a big part of this is that, like, if you want something to be true, you'll search out the evidence and rely on confirmation bias to buy into it.
Confirmation bias is hard, even for people that really care about truth. You've got to be double questioning yourself and getting people that you know are reliable and will look at it skeptically to look at it, especially if you want it to be true. That's when you know it's got to be someone else needs to look at this as well.
Well, and con artists will play on this. They realize that if you want someone to believe you, you have to offer them something, incredible that they just really can't, that they can't ignore. If you offer someone this, wonderful concept of like, oh yeah, I'm here to help you. You can talk to the dead. You can, connect with your loved ones, and life doesn't end after you die, but it's even better. And people are like, oh wow, that's amazing. Like you must have my best intentions at heart because you're offering me something good and beautiful and wonderful. And then it turns out that it's all, made up, and that there's no evidence for it. And that, we get so caught up in this wishful thinking that we don't apply skepticism where we should.
Yeah.
And
this is kind of like one of the reasons I enjoy talking about this sort of stuff though, because like just from a completely personal point of view, I wish ghosts were real. I wish spirits and psychics were real, because that would be so interesting and so much fun and so exciting. Like, but you just look at the evidence, and as much as you want it to be real, like nothing stacks up. Like you watch kind of like, like ghost hunting programs like Most Haunted and stuff, and it's like, no, Derek Acorah's just an okay actor. It's like the spirits and the orbs you see on screen, they're literally just dust particles and stuff, and it's just.
Well, Derek Acorah is another great example of hot reading, because like there was someone else on the set that basically fed him a name of like, oh yeah, we're going to this house, and there was this guy named Creed Kafer that used to live here, and then like Derek's like pretends to be channeling the ghost of this Creed Kafer, and then it's revealed afterwards that Creed Kafer was a made up name, and it was Derek Faker. It was an anagram, or what do you call it when you mix up the letters?
That's so good.
And so I want to get into cold reading next, and that's where what would be an example of cold reading? How is that different from hot reading, Steve?
Okay, so cold reading is when you come in contact with somebody and you don't know anything about them, but you're using cold reading techniques to acquire a lot more. So immediately when you see someone,
an example of like, how would you be able to gather information about someone?
Sure. So here's an example, and it's kind of like combined with what you would call a Barnum statement, which I'm sure we'll tap into at some point. But
we'll get into that in a second.
Absolutely. So an example is the recent video I did. An astrologer, he came in contact with somebody, and this person was, I believe, a transsexual, or whatever. I don't mind, whatever the term. I don't want to get in trouble. Transgender, whatever it is. That's just my ignorance. It's not me being a douche. But
I understand.
But immediately from looking at this individual, you can tell a hell of a lot about them. You can tell that they've had, if you was to say something such as, you've had a difficult life. Well, fucking yes. This person's trying to live the way they feel comfortable to live in a world which doesn't necessarily accept them. But anyway, the astrologer said, I can tell that, let me look at your hands. And he looked at the hands and he said, so you're an independent thinker. Well, he obtained that information by the fact that this person is transsexual or transgender, because that somebody who would go through what that person's going through and do what that person's doing is an independent thinker. You have to be. But he's pretending that he acquired it through other means. That's kind of what cold reading's about.
So like Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah. That's a great example. Yeah, Sherlock Holmes is cold reading to the max and a little bit far-fetched. But yeah, like that would be just incredible cold reading
so if you walk in and you see like a wedding ring on someone, you're like, okay, they're married.
Yep.
You might look for
is this
person
like calluses,
do they bite their nails? Are they nervous? Do they, is their shirt tucked in? Have they spilled food on themselves? Are they careful? Is everything like pristine and perfect?
To tell their income level.
I just got one on that was great. The astrologer came up to this tall young man, very nicely trimmed beard, very kept hair, wonderful clothes, a scarf, and he immediately went, Are you an artist? And they were like, wow. And on the video, I go, wow, I thought he was a bricklayer. Because when you look at this individual, you can tell just from the appearance that anyone that's really paying attention can guess there's something artistic going on there.
Well, and the use of terms too, like artist doesn't necessarily mean painter. It could be like, oh yeah, I'm a musician.
Yep.
Or, oh yeah, I'm a video editor.
Yep.
Or something, a videographer. Exactly. There's so many different types of artists.
And even if he was a bricklayer, you can still make that a hit by saying, I bet you put the bricks down better than some of your comrades. And one that's definitely going to be a yes. Yep. Yeah, exactly. And they go, yeah. And it's like, well, you can tell that from the fact that he's well kept. Like that's going to translate into at least some of his work.
It's like using these big generalizations, like saying you work with your hands, or you really work with people, don't you? Are you in a customer-facing job, like that sort of stuff?
Yeah, you can tell a lot of information on it. There was a great thing where Darren Brown is just brilliant when it comes to this stuff because he's so transparent with it, because he very much says that he's absolutely convinced that the people that claim to have these abilities are either lying or mentally ill. That's essentially what's said.
So I think because a lot of it is often intuition-based, a lot of people don't know that they're picking up on it. Some people can be naturally just quite observant of other people. And so that's how they kind of con themselves into thinking they have psychic abilities, because they don't even realize. They just think, oh, the spirits must be telling me this stuff, when really they're just super observant.
Yeah.
So what I would like to do is, while we're on the topic of cold reading, I want to maybe perform a psychic reading on you guys.
Yes.
Go for it.
And I want you to remain open-minded to the possibility of, the supernatural world. I realize that you're both skeptical, but I'm going to take my knowledge of the spirits in the spirit world in order to tap into the other side.
Thomas, have you been reading How to Discover Your Psychic Powers?
So first, what I need to know from you is, Rachel. Rachel, what is your birthday?
It's the 11th of April, 93. It's on Wednesday. 2 days.
11th of April, and
you're 44, yeah.
Hey.
Also, Steve, when is your birthday?
Give me a second. That's a hard one. 30th of May.
Okay. So, Rachel, you are an Aries, am I correct? And 30th of May, hang on, what zodiac sign would that be?
Taurus?
You
Or Gemini?
Gemini. Okay, Aries and Gemini. Ooh, there's some good stuff here for you guys. Okay, so Rachel, I feel like you have a great need for other people to like and admire you, but you have a tendency to be critical of yourself. And Steve, I'm getting that you have a huge amount of unused capacity within you that if you really were to tap into that, you could turn it to your advantage.
No, I like that.
While you have some, personality weaknesses, you're generally able to compensate for them. How am I doing so far? Is it fairly
so
spot
generic,
on?
that last bit.
I love it. I think the way you delivered it as well to somebody that wanted that to be true. Oh, all over that. All over
honest,
it.
Here's the problem with cold
spot
reading.
On.
Here's the problem with cold reading. What I just listed off, those are a couple of examples of Barnum statements, which is named after P.T. Barnum, whose circus it was basically, we have something for everyone, where these statements, they seem specific, but they apply to everyone. If you say something, if you start off with the assumption that it works, you will look for exactly where it fits and you will make it work for you. And if you come at it from a position of skepticism, like in this case, we don't actually believe in psychics. We're skeptical. And so, as soon as we hear like, oh, we're getting into cold reading and Barnum statements, you're going to look for ways to tear it to shreds. And you're going to be like, oh yeah, that applies to everyone and this, part applies and this part doesn't and stuff. And you're going to pick it apart. But if I had come about this from a position of, if I'm sitting on the street corner and I say, I'm a psychic, and someone believes in psychics and they come up to me and they genuinely believe that I have these abilities, I could say those same exact statements. And to them, they'd be like, oh, wow, like they really must know me. It depends on the credulity of the person who is the sitter, who is having the reading done on them.
Exactly.
I did this to my mum like 2 months ago, and we were in a bookshop, and I was like trying to explain to her what Barnum statements were, and I don't quite think it was like clicking for her at the time. And we saw these like horoscope books, and she was like, "Oh no, but there's a lot of truth in that, and astrology, and they're surprisingly accurate." I was like, "Okay, then let's see how accurate this is." And I picked up a book and told her it was the Gemini one, which is her star sign, and I was like reading off these statements about how she's an authority and people come to her because they trust her, and she's like, they do all the like new people at work, they always come to me for help. I was like, okay, and you're quite a people person, but you also like a bit of space of your own. I was reading this stuff and she was like, see, it's accurate, it's me. I was like, yeah, but this is the Cancer book. And she was like, oh.
It's the wrong sign.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of clicked for her. She was like, oh, okay then.
Yeah.
And like, they're generic statements that fit a majority of the population, and it's very, very easy to be sucked into them.
Another example is people use the rainbow ruse, which is basically where you tell people two things that are opposites in such a way that like they're gonna believe in it, they're gonna cling to whichever one works. So an example of that would be like, most of the time you're positive and cheerful, but there's been a time in the past when you were very upset. Okay. Or you're a very kind and considerate person, but when someone does something to break your trust, you feel deep unseated anger. Well, that's everybody. And or you say, you're very extroverted at times, but sometimes you just want to get away. It's like you're telling someone one thing and the exact opposite. And if someone is more extroverted than introverted, then one part will apply to them and they'll be like, oh yeah, that's true. But sometimes I'm this, most people aren't 100% extroverted all the time and 100% introverted all the time.
Yeah.
You do two statements and they're like, oh yeah, of course that applies to me. And you're just telling them the exact opposite of the first thing that you told them.
And yeah, that feeds into probably one of the I would say the biggest thing when it comes to these readings, etc. The people want it to be true. They paid their tickets. They're going there because they want to speak with deceased loved ones. They want to, whatever nonsense it is, they want it to be true. And that means that the confirmation bias, and this is coupled with statistically not as well educated, you're going to get the result. It's going to happen because you're going to see what you want to see.
Psychologist, Dr. Ray Hyman, who he used to be in college, he was a palm reader, and he did that to pay his college expenses. And at first, he kind of was like buying into it, but then when he went to like learn how to do it and he read all the books and stuff, he's like, okay, there's, it's not actually, it's not necessarily paranormal, but he was kind of following the techniques and people were, oh wow, that really applies to me. That's amazing. And then he decided to do a little experiment. And he's like, what if instead of, telling them, following the guidelines of, oh, if you have this line, long in this area, then it means that you'll have like a long life or something. What if I tell them the exact opposite? And what if I give them the opposite reading? And so he started telling them exactly the opposite of what he was getting. And he found that the amount of hits that he got were exactly the same. So people he was telling them the exact opposite reading and they're still going, oh wow, that really applies to me. That's amazing. Like, that's incredible. And
so I have a slight question based off this, because you both kind of brought up the idea of people paying for readings and stuff. Do you think psychics are more likely to get hits when people have paid for a reading than when they haven't, because they kind of want it to be more true? So do you think a psychic who, someone who like pays for a psychic reading is gonna find more hits in their reading than someone who just gets a free reading on the street?
Yes.
Yes, as well.
Yeah.
You said at the beginning that you haven't went because you don't want to be giving these people money. And that's a principle that I admire. I think that's fantastic. Well, that in and of itself, and it's something I would do as well, means that statistically already, it's more likely that they're going to get people coming to them that actually believe and want to believe in whatever nonsense they're perpetuating. Whereas the skeptics tend to just stay away and go and sigh and go,
but
wow.
I mean, like, even if there's someone who does think they believe in this stuff to begin with, do you think they'd say that a reading they paid for was more accurate than one they got for free?
I would say yes.
Yeah, they would. You've got
the reason behind that is that we all are built in with a loss aversion bias, where once we've invested in something, we would rather double down than experience the pain of realizing that we wasted our money.
Yep.
And that we lost something. And so, if they pay, $100 for a reading and then they find out right afterwards, like, oh, it was all, it was all BS, then they're going to be like, no, like I wouldn't waste my money on BS. Like, I can't, we emotionally try to cope with it by denying it.
Yeah. And and it doesn't have to be purchased with money. It can be purchased with time. So a lot of people have certain arguments and premises that build up their religious beliefs, and confrontation of why that is not sufficient, why that's wrong. The loss aversion can make them think, I spent 10 years in this. I stayed with my partner because I actually believed I would go to hell, etc. The loss aversion is so raw. The confirmation bias, the psychological backflips that take place are just, it's almost unfightable. So the loss doesn't have to be monetary.
Well, but people wind up losing more, because then they spend the rest of their life following something that's not true, because they're afraid of, it's like, well, you've already lost the last few years. Like, that part you can't really get back, you've already spent time invested in something that's not true. But from here on out, you have an option to either spend the rest of your life, in the same boat, or you can actually start believing things that are true.
So I've got a really interesting question for you, but I'll ask after Rachel. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So Dan kind of thinks his mum has this kind of view a bit, because you guys know that his mum is really into this weird cult called Adidan, and they follow this guru called Adidar, and I find him a little bit creepy. He's dead now.
Does he make shoes?
No. No, he's I think he looks a little bit creepy. But he's dead now, but back in the 80s and stuff, there were all these allegations of abuse, sexual abuse, him having these creepy orgies with like lots and lots of women that he basically like forced into it. There's all this messed up stuff around it. But she still follows it completely. She literally has a shrine in her attic to this guy. And Dan is like, Dan's tried to explain to her that, like, there's nothing in this, it's not real. She's tried to, like, she used to take him to these, like, cult getaway type things, like in America and stuff, when he was a child. And since Dan's grown up, he's like, Mum, there's nothing in this. but she doesn't want to listen to him, and Dan thinks it's just because she spent so much of her life
Mm.
devoted to it, and literally she spent thousands upon thousands of pounds on this. Like, she has hundreds of books in her house, she has this huge shrine, she's always like donating money to stuff, she's gone to these retreats, she pays for like spiritual whatever, and Dan thinks she's kind of at the point now where she's invested so much, she'd rather live in kind of ignorant bliss than face the consequences of a wasted life.
I think unfortunately
she'd
people
rather
do go
double
there.
down than
Exactly,
she'd rather
yeah.
double down than face the harsh reality.
Exactly.
Before doing a video that I did on channeling, I had somebody contact me and ask if they could have a conversation with me. They even said, "I'll pay for a conversation. I need to talk to you." And I was like, "Well, don't be silly. Like, just give me your Skype and I'll talk to you." And we spoke. This young lady living in London, and she was furious because she had been doubling down and having this loss aversion for ages when it came to channeling. For anyone that doesn't know, channeling is basically when someone asserts that they can telepathically communicate with aliens or something else and then convey
the
that.
dead.
Yeah. And then that alien or that dead person manifests their body and can speak to you through it. So they often put on voices, and it's just a shit show. But you know, again, it's taken seriously by a lot of people. But after so much loss aversion, like we're talking, I think it was something like £15,000, which is a lot of money to a young person in London. She was so furious that it kind of backlashed, and she just basically wanted to fight against these people. And she was like, "I'll pay you, create a video on them." And I was like, "No, don't be silly. This is a very legit cause." And I felt bad for her. But it seems that people either, and I think this is more likely, they just have the loss aversion. They never change their minds. They never really embrace what's really being said and done, or rather than, although it's possible, they go the other way and go, "I've had enough of this," which is why a lot of the skeptics used to be people that bought into crap. So a lot of the famous atheists are people that used to be Christian, for example. So yeah, I don't think that's a mistake.
Well, I do think that while there is such a thing as, loss aversion, and that we do have emotional barriers to accept certain things, there is a tipping point. You do accumulate more and more and more and more facts, and you can only deny it for so long. And then suddenly you encounter one, or you see one emotional thing that triggers a frustration. There's a tipping point, and then you're like, oh my God. And then it's like suddenly once you have that kind of emotional breakthrough, you start to kind of look into it more, and you start to realize and accept the information at that point, and the research is more effective.
So on that note, I have a very interesting question for you both. I don't fully know the answer or how I would respond to it myself, but do you think you can make yourself believe something? Do you think that can be done? Even in the face of evidence and facts that you just know can't be squared. You can't square those circles, as it were.
I'm not sure if consciously and rationally you can, but I think emotionally a lot of people do it.
Mm.
Like, they want to believe in something so much, or they need that comfort, or they need something that they do convince themselves. I'm not sure if it's like a conscious thing, but...
I would have said, if you'd asked me this 6 months ago, I would have said, you can't choose what to believe.
Yeah.
Because, if I put a gun to your head and I say, believe that I'm a guitar, then, and if you don't, I'm going to blow your brains out. You can't you can lie and say that you do, but you don't actually believe it.
Yeah.
But then since then, I've kind of changed my tune a little bit, and that, I do think that people can be brainwashed. And I do think that you can take a commonsensical idea and just, through chanting and mantras and repeating the same thing over and over and over and over again, and, attending sessions on it and just putting yourself in this massive echo chamber or something. I think that your beliefs, like, to a large extent, you can change it yourself, because there are people who they're like, oh, I have a hard time. I'm losing my faith in God, but I just need to really, really force myself back into it and do all of these things. And, it's like sticking your head in the sand.
But a lot of the time, that's
deep down inside, I think deep down inside, a lot of times, like, they no longer believe it, but they force themselves to emotionally buy into it to the point where they will swear up and down that they do believe it.
When I hear people say I'm losing my faith, and it's in one of the Abrahamic religions, when I ask them why, it's never really. I very rarely get an answer such as, I looked up whether or not this watchmaker argument of mine is true, and it isn't, and now I'm having an existential crisis. It's always, I don't understand why God won't let me have a car, or some triviality, or I'm having a difficulty at the moment with my children and wife. I'm having this existential crisis. I'm losing my faith. Like, that's just a language that they use. They're not really.
Well, no, but I've talked to a lot of people, and my story as well was like, you know, really learning the ins and outs of evolution and abiogenesis and, you know, where the universe came from, and that a lot of the stuff that I was taught, I was misinformed on. And so that kind of caused me to reevaluate and to look deeper. And it was a long process of several years, but it was a process of losing my faith based off of actual evidence.
Yeah, because
That's
in that case,
because you know the guy, I think it's Barnum, something like that, and it's a guy who wrote books like Misko and Jesus. He used to be very religious, and he's now an atheist, and he makes all these amazing points in his books about how you know, the Bible was written for these reasons, and there's contradictions here for this reason and this reason, and there's all these problems like here and here. And he makes all these really rational arguments, but then he'll sit back and say, but this isn't the reason I'm now an atheist. The reason I'm now an atheist is because I couldn't understand the idea of suffering in a world where there was a loving God. So it does seem like, you know, even the most rational, logical, skeptical people are more swayed by the emotional reasons than purely rational.
To be fair, when somebody, for example, says that an omnipotent, omnipresent, omnibenevolent God exists, there's many reasons why I don't think, for example, the Abrahamic God exists. But if I was to compare lots of the reasons why I'm not convinced of that, the problem of evil is a problem. It's not solved like what they say. So the idea that a baby can be born with stage 4 cancer is, you cannot square that with an all-powerful, all-loving God. I don't know what backflips you're doing, but it's a joke. It's a joke. You don't understand. There's some wisdom behind it, etc. It's not good enough. Not good enough. And I know people can say, well, there might be some way that's made up to them. Like, it's necessary that this poor small child must suffer so horrifically, etc., etc. But I can see why that's more of a powerful reason for someone to lose their faith, like realizing that, than realizing there's no objective source for Jesus resurrecting.
Yeah. So tying that back into kind of the psychic phenomenon is like, if people have an emotional tie and an emotional connection to an idea, like they want it to be true, they don't want to have lost grandma, they want to be able to continue talking to them, or they lost a child, they want to continue talking to them, then it's really easy to overlook some of these, especially if you don't know the tactics that are being used. Now, when it comes to cold reading, we talked about how you can pick up a lot just by looking at someone and just kind of seeing, you know, their body language. Are they reacting? You know, first of all, what are they wearing? How do they look? Do they have scars? Do they have, you know, what are they wearing? But also, you can pick up a lot from how they react. So let's say that you start saying something to someone, and you say, you know, you're talking to like, there's a video, again, the Rosemary Altea one, where she's talking to this guy about his mother, and she says, you know, your mother's here and she wants to talk to you, and like, she seems like really, really just excited and out there right now. And like, he's kind of like, he looks puzzled by it, and he's kind of shaking his head just very, very slightly. And she just pauses mid-sentence and she goes, which is so not like her. And all of a sudden he like brightens up and smiles and nods his head. And you can tell that, you know, there's a lot of body language reading that's going on. And when a psychic goes into a reading, you know, in person with someone, there's so much that's being given away. And so like, if you really want to test for something like this, there's the James Randi Educational Foundation does tests on, you know, cold reading and psychic abilities and stuff. And one of their main testing people who's in charge of it is his name's Banachek, or Steve Shaw was, and his stage name's Banachek. He does magic stuff, magic shows and whatnot. But one of the things he does, like for palm reading, is he'll take pictures of the palms, and then he'll have them, the psychic, try to give a reading to people based off of their palms, and then have, you know, the people try to figure out which reading is theirs and stuff based off of, you know, what the psychic put down, and it never matches up. And or they'll do stuff like, if let's say that I want to do a reading for you without getting any kind of feedback, I could have, you know, you stand right on the other side of a curtain. And if I'm really able to talk with the dead and sense the spirits and stuff in the room, then without you ever saying anything, I should be able to give you a full-blown reading without ever seeing you, and you're right on the other side of the curtain. I should know exactly who it is that comes in to talk to you. Instead, they throw out this stuff like, I'm getting a J name or an M name or something.
They did that on This Morning. Did you see that episode where they had 3 objects from 3 celebrity guests, and she was absolutely awful and she couldn't tell them, and they were like hiding behind a door, and she had to like feel the object and like, you know, get the essence from the object and try and tell like who it was. And she picked up a watch and she was like, oh, she's a writer, she's this, and it was like some male singer or something.
Yeah.
It was really funny.
But if you can't see the person, you don't get feedback, then you're going to get a lot more misses. And it's just going to seem like statistical guesses.
Yeah. You know, you're saying about the reactionary face expressions and micro expressions, which Darren Brown has touched on before. One of the readings I saw was somebody said to a young arty looking female who had lots of piercings and a few tattoos, which indicates that she's a bit of a misfit. Just because of the place that she was, etc. He said, and it's an easy Barnum statement. He said, your grandma's very important to you, because that's important. Almost all of us consider at least one grandma to be important. And the way she said yes, he knew that was a big hit. So he followed it with very important for you. And she went, yeah. And because of the way she went, yeah, he made another assumption, which is based on good evidence, you know, the way she expressed herself. He said, she looked after you. She said yes again. She went, I'm getting that she filled in for you where mum and pop didn't. And she's just like, wow. And it's like, pay attention. Like, that's obvious what he's doing.
Yeah.
£100, please.
So Steve, you I'm getting a psychic reading that you lost someone that you loved.
Yes.
And they were a friend to you, and maybe not quite as close as you would have liked to have been. But their passing meant a great deal to you. And is this ringing a bell? Like, is this am I connecting with you?
Yeah, it's really true. Thank you.
And was I feel like there's a J or an M name connected with this person.
J or an M? Could it be a second name?
It could be a last name or a first name.
Yeah. Could it be Mills? Is it Mills that's coming through?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, Mills. So. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Oftentimes psychics they'll use tricks like this where they notice how my word choice in that reading was, you know, there's someone connected to you that you lost. Now, I know that because you're younger, you're in your 20s, it's probably not your parents that were lost.
Mm-hmm.
I could have said, have you lost, you know, a father figure or a parent figure? And if you say no, you know, it's like, well, you probably didn't lose your parents. If you were older, I would guess that. But I could be like, maybe it was a grandfather, grandmother, or an uncle. You know, most people don't, by the time you're in your 20s, you don't have all 4 of your grandparents anymore. So at this point, you're getting into statistics. And statistically, you know, most people by the age of 20, 30, they've lost at least one grandparent. Now, if you're older than that, you're, you know, 50s, 60s, you've probably lost at least one of your parents at that point. And so you'll see psychics all the time. They'll throw this out, and oftentimes they'll shotgun it into a crowd. So they're giving a reading, you know, on live TV. John Edwards goes in front of stages a lot. What's the blonde? Shar Margolis does this a lot. Then there's the short guy with the mustache. Blanking on his name. But what they'll do is that it's not even hard. And they have a few things that they know are statistically significant, and they'll blast out into an audience like, I feel like there was a father figure and there's like a J or an M name connected. And well, okay, J or an M, those are the two most common initials, male and most common female initials. And they'll say like MA or MAR. Well, okay, that's funny because Mary and Margaret and Maggie and, you know, like these are Martha, like some of the most common names in, you know, like especially Mary is one of the most common English girls' names. And when they do this, when they go to different countries, oftentimes they fail. So like there's been some psychics that like they went from the US to Ireland and the names were so radically different that they were just getting miss after miss after miss. But when they're in the US, they know the statistical, you know, the most statistically common names, and they get much, much more hits when they guess, you know, names that are connected to people. Now notice, if I say something like there's someone who passed and I feel like there's a J or an M name connected, that doesn't mean that it's the person who died whose name starts with a J or an M. It could be like, you know, oh yeah, they died, and oh yeah, their son's name was John.
Like
you know,
I connected it with the second name.
Or they'll say J sounding. Okay, well, George. It's not doesn't start with a J, but it's J sounding. Okay, yeah. Well, you know, oh yeah, their dad's name was George. Oh yeah, they're trying to reach their father. They're trying to come through, and they have something to tell him.
Okay. They tend to use numbers a lot as well, and they'll be like, okay, I'm getting the number 5. What does that mean to you? And is it 5 siblings? Is it 5 years? Mm-hmm. Is it 5 children?
They were 5 when they died, or they were born on the 5th, or they were born on the 5th month, or they were born in 2005, or they died in 2005. Like, there's an infinite number of ways that you can make this fit.
I've actually seen one clip where they did that, and then the person in the audience was like, no, I don't know. And the psychic was like, well, I'm getting the number 5, so it's up to you to figure out what that means, because I'm right. And I was like, what?
Wow.
I was like, these all of those people.
Or they'll say, were there 5 siblings? And like, there's one case where John Edwards said, did you have 5 siblings? Well, yes, we did. Oh yeah, that was a hit. Oh, there was actually 9 of us total. And it's like, well, that's not 5.
No. That's crazy.
I was just going to say. Girls, so.
No, they'll be like 5 girls and 4 boys. No, there were 3 girls and, you know, well, we're 5 similar and 4 different.
Well, 5
well, you think about it. I'm sure you'll find a way to make it fit. Like, think about it.
That's basically what you said.
Later.
Yeah, you'll get it fit because I'm right.
Yeah, you blame the sitter for not making it fit.
If you can't play the game, blame the game.
Another trick is the vanishing negative.
I was just going to say before you come off that, the way that you said blast, that's a shotgun statement, right?
Yeah. They're shotgunning it out.
Yeah.
Well, the shotgunning is like, it's when they're shooting it out at the crowd trying to get someone to make it fit.
And it's also a really good way.
If you have a crowd full of like 100 people and you say, someone lost somebody named Mary.
Yeah.
Well, no shit. It's like, of all your parents, your grandparents, your siblings, your friends, like the hundreds of people you're connected with, 100 people in the audience, like that's a massive amount of people that statistically, you know, one of them is going to be connected to someone who lost someone named Mary. And sometimes they'll backtrack. So they'll be like, someone lost someone named Mary, or maybe it's an M sounding name. Really? Like, you're able to talk with a dead person, but all they can give is like, or juh. Like, come on.
Yeah, crazy. Absolutely crazy.
When you're doing a one-on-one reading, they'll phrase their questions in a very, very specific way. So you'll hear things a lot where like, Rachel, you didn't ever live in London, did you?
I did. I do.
You did? Yes, that's what I thought. And while you were there, you didn't happen to work at a coffee shop, did you?
I didn't know.
No, I didn't think so. No. But you did have. You see that if you phrase it in a question.
I did drink at a coffee shop once, though. Could that be what you're?
I feel like there was a coffee shop where you connected with. There was a cute guy at a coffee shop.
Well, I didn't go with my boyfriend, but I went with my boyfriend's mum.
No, but maybe there was a guy who it was a cute couple. He was with his girlfriend there, and you talked with them. He was holding a laptop.
I want.
It'll come back to you. We'll move forward. But
you think about that a bit more.
Yeah.
These statements, if you say, you know, you didn't live in London, did you? Then if the person says yes, it's like, they told me I lived in London. Yeah. No, they didn't. They said they asked a question. They asked you if you live in London.
But it's done as
and
a
if
statement.
you phrase it and if you phrase it in such a way like you didn't live in London, did you? Or you don't happen to own a pair of headphones right now, do you? Then it's like, okay, you're if you say you don't or you didn't or you're not, and you do it kind of as a negative statement, then you can easily say like, no, I didn't think so. Like, you don't own a Toyota Camry, do you? Like you don't happen to own a Toyota Camry, Rachel. Do you? No, I didn't think so. I didn't think so.
The way that you said I didn't think so afterwards, that's what I was crying with laughter about, because it was the idea that it's just like the psychic brings up something that's not relevant. So you didn't live in London, did you? And they go, no. And they go, I didn't think so. That implies I just brought it up for shits and giggles. Let's move on.
But they'll connect it. Oftentimes, if they're good, if they know what they're doing, they'll connect the vanishing negative to something else.
Yeah.
So they'll say something like, you didn't happen to work in the healthcare industry, did you? Okay, well, first of all, that's a statistically high guess. Like, if you're guessing someone is kind of upper middle class, and it's like, you happen to be, or they'll make it even broader. They'll say like, you are some type of caregiver. That could be like a nurse or a teacher or someone who's like providing something for others. Okay, or a daycare worker or anything. It's like, oh yeah, at some point in my life, I happen to teach students, or I happen to babysit, or I happen, there's so many things that fall in that category. But if you say something like, you didn't happen to do this, did you? And they say, no, I never worked in the healthcare industry. It's like, yeah, but it's like, I didn't think so, but you had connections to it. And maybe there was a time in your life when you were interested in that and it didn't pan out.
And if they want it to be true, they could just say their mum.
The person on the other end is trying to reach out to you and tell you that, that door is still open. It's not shut. And if you want to go into that still, you can. And suddenly you're providing something meaningful and personal to them that they're emotionally connected to. Like, oh my God, Tommy's telling me I need to get back into nursing. And so you find connections, but you're doing it by wording something and kind of, jumping from one thing to the next. And these psychics, they get so good at rapid fire questions. So as soon as there's a miss, they move instantly into the next one. Oh, I didn't think so, but there's something else here. Or there's some other, they have so many excuses lined up as to why they went down that rabbit hole. When honestly, they're just interrogating the person in front of them.
Like voluntary interrogation. You pay money to say, interrogate me.
Now, one of my favorite aspects of the whole psychic phenomenon is precognition or prophecy, because you can't tell until years later if it came true or not. So, Rachel, in 3 years' time, you're going to have a massive, massive change in your life. Okay? And involving money. Okay, and I can't tell if you're going to get a raise or you're going to start a business.
Could it be a loss of money? I worry about that. Yeah.
No, this is positive. Okay. It's a positive thing. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's as a result of this, you're going to move.
Oh.
And I can't tell if you're moving for the new position or because you can then afford a nicer home. But shortly after, you're going to move.
That's so crazy. Like, we've been thinking about, staying here for a couple more years and then moving to a bigger place.
Yeah. No, I thought so. Yeah.
And that's funny because in 3 years' time, like if we get a dog now and it's a puppy, he'll be fully grown by then, so we might need a bigger place.
And also,
when you get the puppy, make sure that you get him tested at the vet.
Okay.
Because I feel like there's some medical things that you need to be cautious with.
See, that's interesting because we're getting him from a shelter, so they actually do all the veterinary tests. So, God, you're spot on. You're so spot on.
The other thing going on here is the probable assumptions being made. So, Rachel is, a young lady, and
am I?
I think so. You tell us. But when people who are young get to about age 28, 29, which will be in a couple of years or however many years, probably much more than 3. But
no,
you have to keep your age unknown to the world forever.
I'm 25 in 2 days.
what a lie.
Old.
Quarter of a century, yes. So 28, 29, 30. That's the time where young people were trying to get on the property ladder. So that's one big change. Also, it's arbitrary. It's how the person interprets it. So a big change can be anything. A big change can be a change in mentality towards someone or something. A loss of a relationship. Most relationships end 3-5 years. You'll get into a new relationship with someone. A family member might die. It's so ambiguous.
Yeah, you could inherit money.
Yep.
You could win a prize.
Yep.
You could get most people about every year or so will get some type of job raise, or they'll start some little side hustle or something. Especially when you're young at that age.
And it can also become a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense that if you have this mentality, something changes this year, you will pursue it more. You'll go, I'm not being agreeable at my job anymore. I'm getting a raise or I'm getting a new job. You go in there, you demand it. You go, no, I'm worth more than this and I don't feel valued. They give you the rise. Yep. You go, oh, the psychic was right. It's like, well, no, he wasn't. Or yes, he was, because his spew was ambiguous nonsense.
Yeah. It's like if someone tells you that, like, you know, the stars are lined up against you, today's going to be an awful day. Well, you might go outside with a chip on your shoulder, and everyone that cuts you off in traffic is suddenly like the devil himself. Whereas if someone tells you that today is the most amazing day ever, it's like, oh, well, you know, someone cut me off in traffic, but it's okay. Today's the most amazing day ever. Yeah. You know, a lot of it depends on, you know, when you buy into it, you can make some of it come true based on, you know, how you react. But when I said, you know, within, you know, the next 3 years, in the next 3 years, you're going to get a raise. Well, okay, you could say, well, it wasn't on the third year, but it was within the 3 years. You know, 2 years later, you got a raise. Yeah, it was within 3 years. I got a job raise.
I think,
no
to be honest, anyone who was in a job and didn't get a raise or didn't have something change in 3 years would be pretty upset about that.
Yeah.
You know.
And then I say that then shortly after you're going to move. Okay, well, how shortly is shortly? Oh yeah, 9 years later we moved. You know, a month later we moved. 2 years later, that's so arbitrary. It's like, yeah, you know, he said that I was going to get a job, or I was going to get a raise and then move, and I got a raise and we moved. Or you know, also, you know, you're young, and you know, probably you're going to be, like Steve said, searching for jobs. People get married around that age. Oftentimes they get bigger homes, or they get pets, or they have kids and they move to bigger homes. There's so many things there that you're playing into, but at the same time, what are you going to do 3 years from now if none of that comes true? Are you going to come back and hunt down the psychic and find them and demand your money back?
That sounds like something
Probably
I'd do.
not.
Exactly.
So like a great example of the prophecy thing not working is the psychic twins went on a show, and like they predicted like so many different things about like there's going to be an AIDS cure by 2002, and like this was back in 1999. And you can still find this episode up online. And they blast out so many failed predictions. There's going to be alien contact by, I think, like 2012 or something. And like, it's just one after another. They say, you know, but then they point to it and they're like, we predicted 9/11. It's like, no, they said that there's going to be a terrorist attack that, you know, and that they mentioned a bunch of federal buildings. And then they said that it would also be on the World Trade Center. They didn't say it was planes. They didn't say it was Al-Qaeda. They didn't say what. But they said
didn't even get the year right. They were like a year out.
They said the year was 2002.
Yeah.
And the buildings were gone by 2001. And so it's so easy for them to afterwards point back and be like, we got one right. It's like, okay, well, how many shows did you go on predicting things like, I think that they said that Christopher Reeve would walk again. The, you know, actor who played Superman who was paralyzed, and he died. And there was never, you know, there wasn't a cure found for it. One of them said that they didn't think he would, and the other one said that they thought he would. And it's just like there's all these predictions that they're making that are so wrong. And they said that there's going to be a race riot in Tennessee that never happened, certain school shootings that never happened. It's like when you shotgun out enough predictions, you can go back and cherry pick and be like, well, we got that one right.
Yeah.
Now, the last thing I really want to cover before we wrap up is what is the harm? Is it all good fun, or what is the harm of something like this? Rachel.
Well, you're targeting emotionally vulnerable people for your own monetary gain. And even though there might be, you know, a little bit of comfort every now and again, I think you're doing more harm than good. Like, there might be a few good points here and there, but ultimately, if you're taking money from a couple who just lost their baby to tell them, yeah, your baby's fine, when, you know, it's not, it's dead. That's pretty horrible, I think.
Yeah. Well, so one great instance of this is, you know, we talked about Sylvia Brown making predictions about family members being dead, and they turned out to be alive. One woman she had hope to find her daughter. She was searching, and then she heard that her daughter was dead, and she just lost all hope and gave up and was, you know, depressed, and she died like within a few months. And then her daughter was found shortly afterwards, and her daughter remembers that she saw Sylvia Brown give the prediction, and she was screaming at the television like, "No, I'm alive. Like, what is wrong with you?" And there was another case where a guy heard that his like he kept going to psychics, and the psychic's like, "Yeah, you know, your wife is on the other side. She's just waiting for you." And so he went home and he blew his own brains out. And so you're giving misinformation to people, and you're telling them things that can lead them to do horrible things. And
really
you're
mislead
especially
police cases as well, and like waste their time.
Yeah. Police resources have been wasted and squandered by psychics. People have had their entire life savings drained. There was a guy that spent $50,000 on a psychic. And in addition to that, I think it's that what I find really frustrating is that like they're putting society backwards.
Yeah.
They're teaching stuff based on pseudoscience, based on woo that there's no evidence for, and they're conning people. But rather than saying like, you know what, like this is all fun and games, you know, it's just a deception, and it's like mentalism and tricks and stuff like mentalists and magicians do. You know you're being lied to, but you're paying for the entertainment. Rather than that, they're telling you that something isn't true, and it's putting society back. We could be making all this scientific progress, and instead we're blowing money on like psychics, and we're believing in this garbage, and it's leading us to be vulnerable to all kinds of misinformation and pseudoscience.
Yeah,
and so that's why we, you know, try to inform people of the.
I was just going to add,
craziness.
like in a nutshell, it also promotes credulity and denigrates critical thinking. And while in and of itself that might not be a problem in certain circumstances where they're just getting more comfort out of something, that has knock-on effects which are devastating, absolutely devastating. So
when a psychic says you're just not open-minded, you're too skeptical, and they make it seem like it's a bad thing to have doubts and to want evidence for stuff. And that's dangerous.
Yeah,
I can't help but think it's bad for people's like mental health as well. Like if someone is grieving from the loss of a loved one, you know, they might need therapy in order to move on with their lives and understand and like deal with that loss. And instead, if you're telling them, yeah, no, I can let you talk to your dead husband as long as you keep paying me, like that's not going to help people heal at all.
They say they're giving closure. They're not.
No, it's the opposite.
Closure is you know what, like we'll spread the ashes, you know, you cry, you move forward, you get therapy. When you say, oh, they're still here, they can still talk to you, but you have to pay the fee to have that telephone line open. Then it's like, no, you're not going to get closure because you're going to keep going back and trying to talk with your dead family member.
The key word is close. Closure. Done. Like I've made my peace with this. Yeah,
absolutely. So we've covered, you know, some of the ins and outs, the techniques, the tricks. We didn't really have time to get into telekinesis, which is fun, but I will be doing a video debunking that shortly on Holy Kool-Aid. We talked about the harm of it all. Hopefully we can encourage all of you to stay skeptically minded and to really dive deeper into this and examine the facts. There's been a prize right now for over $1 million for over 50 years by the James Randi Educational Foundation for anyone who can prove that psychic abilities exist. And they have
I would love to see someone win it.
They've had so many people come forward to be tested, and not one single person has been able to prove under scientific controls that psychic abilities exist. And that alone is enough reason to stay extremely skeptical. So stay on your toes a little bit. If you see someone or hear someone that claims to have psychic abilities, you know,
watch out for cold reading and hot reading.
Watch out for con men, guard your wallet, and, you know, stay skeptical on that. And we'll be back next week with Rachel Oates. Will be doing an episode on antibiotics and antibiotic resistance. It's going to be super interesting. that is not an area I know a whole lot about. So I'm going to really look forward to hearing you educate us on it, Rachel.
Oh, thanks. Should be fun.
To everyone else, we don't really have a tagline.
That should be our tagline. To everybody else, we don't really have a tagline.
But we will see you in the next episode.
Until next time, my fellow whips.
This has been an absolute blast, and now we want you to join in the conversation over on the Here and How Facebook and Twitter pages, or follow us on Pinterest and Instagram if you just want some of the dankest of science-y memes. If you like one of our particular styles, check out each of our YouTube channels, Rachel Oates, Rationality Rules by Stephen Woodford, and Holy Kool-Aid by me, Thomas Westbrook. To find all of our episodes, show notes, contact information, and more, warp on over to our home base, thehereandhow.com. If you enjoyed this episode and want us to succeed in spreading the love of science, you can help us out by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher. And to all our friends and family listening, thank you for spending this episode with us. We'll be back to explore another exciting big idea next week. Now go create something magnificent.